to Random Links News out here in our San Pedro office. And I've been looking deeply into your campaign, just trying to get an understanding of who you are as a leader, as a commander, an officer of the Sheriff's Department. And you're running against a large field, but everybody's running against Alex Villanueva. But I want to make sure that people know who you are. So I want to start first about 3 particular things that stood out to me in your platform, actually. Mm-hmm. And one of the items in it dealt with, let me pull this out real quick. One specific thing that sort of stood out amongst the rest in your platform. It said, enact a policy that ensures there are no retaliatory arrests for individuals or their family members who speak against the department. Implement a modern approach to crowd control and other First Amendment activity. In your time as a member of the Sheriff's Department, you have experience in knowing from in actual instances of retaliation by the Sheriff's Department against individuals who, either against their families who committed a crime or been a witness to crime or abuse.
Yeah, we have retaliation in a couple of different areas. We have what you're speaking of. We have retaliation on the inside, for speaking out against things. And in this case, we see on the news all the time about family members feeling like they've been harassed, especially family members that have been involved or impacted families who have lost someone to a deputy-involved shooting. And, Terrell, it's one of those things where you don't necessarily see it firsthand. But I'm a firm believer that if people keep talking about the same issues and they keep talking about the same thing, as leaders, we can't just dismiss it and say that's ridiculous, it doesn't happen. We have to look into it, we have to take it seriously, and we have to take steps to make sure that it's not happening, especially any type of retaliation or harassment and so forth. It can't be tolerated whatsoever. I mean, especially when we're dealing with an impacted family who's lost so much already.
Right. And what's also interesting is that part of your platform, you suggest about changing the mission statement or updating the mission statement to not only protect and to serve, but to ensure that respect for community members who are either victims of crime or otherwise are respected. Mm-hmm. And is that part of your mindset of how to transform the culture of the Sheriff's Department?
Absolutely. We need to treat people how we want to be treated. And that we need to treat people how we want our family to be treated. And we learned what we need to know to be successful in this career, in this profession. We really learned it probably in kindergarten. It's pretty simple. If you treat people with compassion, respect, and dignity, that is organically going to change a lot of the interactions. And it's not that difficult. It's really not. I know I've had experiences with law enforcement where I'm being treated a certain way. And as a police officer, as a law enforcement official, I know how I've treated people. And I said, hey, is this really how you guys do business? I'm a police officer. And inevitably, and you could talk to many people, they would say, well, why didn't you tell us? And my first question is, why should I have to? I shouldn't have to tell you what I do for a living to be treated just, with some common courtesy. So that's absolutely something that's very, very important to me. There's no reason to disrespect people. I mean, we're getting paid to be professional.
Right. Now, I brought those 2 specific items up because I understand that you are a native born of Los Angeles County. I'm not sure exactly where, but I just heard you just explained earlier that you did grow up for a period of time in San Pedro. Is that right?
Yes.
Tell me a bit about your experiences growing up. Like, what were the set of circumstances that ultimately led you to consider law enforcement as your career?
Yeah. Interesting is, growing up, I never wanted to be a police officer. My dad was a police officer. And, and growing up is like, no, I don't want to do what he's doing. I want to do something different. But my mom worked in the courts. My dad was a police officer. And so I was around the court system. I was around lawyers and judges and law enforcement my entire upbringing. And so growing up, I wanted to be a lawyer. And somewhere along the line while I was in school, I got an internship with a law firm. And I said, this is boring. I can't sit in this office doing legal research because it was with corporate law. And I said, you know what, maybe I'll go into the law enforcement side and learn that side of it. And then in a few years, go back to school and, become a lawyer. And honestly, I got into the profession, I got into the field, and I never looked back. I've enjoyed it. It's been a great career. I mean, it's had a huge, impact on me, my family, and I like to think I've had a huge impact on others, at least from what I've been told. But the interesting thing to that is growing up, I did have negative experiences with law enforcement. Some not good at all. And the difference is that I got to see my dad as the silly, dancing, laughing, teaching father as a real person, along with a lot of his friends, men and women that were around me almost like family. So when I had negative experiences, I never looked at it and said, the police are bad. I said, that guy is bad, or those two are bad. You know what I mean? So I had a different perspective. And I think there's just a lot of people in our world that don't know a police officer, personally. They don't get a chance to see the human side of it. And I can remember going places, I mean, either on my motorcycle or playing in a rec league, with kids or coaching, and then finding out I'm a police officer and they're surprised. They think we wear the uniform 24/7 and it never comes off. So
now, what's interesting about your biography here is that you went to UCLA. I don't know if you graduated, but you're also a Marine. You graduated from a school in Quantico, is that correct?
FBI National Academy, yes.
There you go. And I'm just trying to put that together, like, what led to the next thing like that? From, like, leaving high school to the rest of your life? Interesting piece. I was really honestly just a normal kid trying to find myself. I went to UCLA for a couple of years. I came from St. John Bosco High School, a small Catholic school, and I got to UCLA and I was in classrooms with 400 students. And to be honest with you, and this is in no way, shape, or form a pat on my back, I was a good student and school came easy for me in high school. So honestly, I didn't have very good study skills. And in getting to school, getting to a large campus, I think, it took me off guard a little bit. There were some other things going on financially that at some point I was working 2 jobs trying to go to school and it became too much. And so I stopped going after my second year. And I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And we talked about it earlier, being young and not knowing. And here I am working 2 jobs thinking I got my own apartment, I got a roommate and I got a car and everything's good. And then it started to dawn on me, like, this is not a career. This is just 2 jobs. I had some mentors talking to me and speaking to me and say, hey, have you considered joining the service? And I hadn't. And I started thinking about it more and more. My family, I come from a family of people that have joined the Marine Corps, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force. And I eventually said, that's something I'd be interested in, but I wanted to go in as an officer. So there was a platoon leaders course. It was called PLC program. And as I started going to the recruiters, I started looking for different things. Silly as it is, I kind of wanted to be a pilot, either with helicopters or something. And so I joined this platoon leaders course, which allows you to go to OCS school in between your school summer breaks. But I also wanted to get my time started in the Marine Corps, so I joined the reserves. And so that way I had the enlisted experience, and I was already in boot camp, and I joined the reserves. I came back, I went to school, started school again, and I was in my early 20s, and I was just really kind of moving around trying to find myself. And so I applied for a few law enforcement agencies. And before I was able to even really, get in good and do the PLC program, I got a phone call, to be hired with Compton PD. And I was like, wow. And it was one of those things where they called me on a Monday. We need you to come down to the station. Hey, we want to hire you, but you need to start the academy Monday, like 7 days. So I had to make a lot of decisions in short time to figure out what I was going to do to sign the paperwork, to get, all the equipment and uniforms and everything. And that's kind of the short story long about how that kind of path Was your father also an officer at the Compton PD at that time, or were you?
Yes, yes, he was.
Okay. What was that period of time like for you? Because that's also the same time period as your rival for the sheriff's department, for the sheriff's position, is Cecil Rhambo. Describe that period of time, your service in the Compton PD.
You know, it was a time when it was extremely busy. I mean, back in the early 90s, you know, Compton, first of all, let me just say this, beautiful city, beautiful homes, beautiful people, but it had a notorious reputation. And probably per capita, and I had done the numbers back then, I won't even say probably, but per capita, probably one of the highest death rates and highest gang populations, probably in the nation. It ranked up there. But I really enjoyed it. Like I said, beautiful people, nice, kind people, beautiful homes, but it was a lot of experience in very short order. I mean, there was always something going on. So I learned a lot in that. You know, when we worked in Compton, they said it was kind of like doing dog years. You know, for 1 year, a dog is like 7 years. And it was really like that in terms of the experience level that you got in the volume, just sheer volume of handling calls and incidents. And the one thing it's important to note about a small agency like Compton is that we don't have a lot of specialized units to call upon. So when there's a traffic collision, even if it's a fatal, the officer on the street, you're handling it. You know, if it's a sexual assault or something like that, you're handling it. When it's a murder, you're there, you're hands-on. You know, we're not a large agency like the sheriff's department where, okay, we're here, call in the experts and have them come in. So I really think you get a lot more experience in actually handling law enforcement incidents.
Actually, what I found interesting is that since Paul Tanaka and Lee Baca, you know, were charged, resigned, you know, went to jail, and Villanueva, Mr. Alex Villanueva sort of stepped in that role after he won the election to become the sheriff. Everybody was running to be that progressive candidate, that anti-Baca, anti-Tanaka, you know, slate. And as a result, we have someone like Mr. Villanueva. I think he made some reforms, but there's some other ways it seemed like the department has regressed. In your evaluation, what is your evaluation of Villanueva's leadership over the past 4 years?
That is very interesting. I would say he's a Baca and Tanaka 2.0. Everything that he has accused them of doing, everything that he said was wrong with what they did, he's done it, and probably done it even to a further extreme than them. The cronyism, the morale, the arrogance of his decisions, and the fact that he's the only one in the room that knows anything, and the vindictiveness of his decision making. You know, he showed very early on, number one, that he had no class. I mean, the first thing that he did was came in and he removed 17 of the top leadership, you know, the brain trust. Now, whether you like them or don't, the reality of it is that these people put 30, 35 years in, and you showed no class and dignity in allowing them to leave with class and dignity. And then honestly, not a very intelligent decision, because now you just got rid of the brain trust. You know, you couldn't even do a transition with them because of your anger and because, oh, they didn't give me what I thought I deserved when I was there.
Now, for people who would not be in the know about what the brain trust, who the brain trust is and what it does, can you provide an explanation for that?
Yeah, so when I say the brain trust, I mean the people in the top executive positions. You know, the undersheriff, assistant sheriffs, chiefs, commanders, those people who are in the top leadership positions that have been there and come up through, you know, the ranks and kind of figured out the ins and outs of the department. They have all of the information, they have the brain books, they've been doing the job.
And so who did he put in their place instead?
People that he chose that had absolutely no experience, very little experience. You know, Alex is not somebody that wants to be surrounded by people smarter than him in the room. He always feels like he is the smartest person in the room. So, and he tells everybody that. He's been doing it for years. I've known the man for probably 17, 18 years. So I'm not surprised at what we're seeing from him. You know, then he came in and everything was about a vindictive mindset. we saw the news. He fought for almost a year trying to bring one particular deputy back, and wasted a lot of time and energy on that. So I think honestly, he's taken us backwards in a lot more ways than many people think.
And it also seems like he's been going after whistleblowers, including your wife.
Yes.
Just to recap, last year, about November or so, she had blown the whistle about moldy food being served to sheriff inmates or inmates under the custody of the sheriff's department, and also the disappearance and reappearance of $15 million out of the budget.
Right.
And what I don't know what happened in that situation is what's become of it.
It's an ongoing investigation. As a matter of fact, she was interviewed last week by Internal Affairs. Basically, she just reported what was going on. And what a lot of people don't realize, it wasn't just reporting the moldy bread. It was reporting her direct executive command that wasn't doing her job, that wasn't responding to the needs of her unit. As a unit commander of food services, she constantly had to report things that were going on. And interesting enough was that her commander was somebody that we had both worked with and knew. As a matter of fact, my wife actually had mentored her at one assignment. And, it shows the nature of people, because the direction of everything with Alex is coming from him. Again, he knows us very well. He came after us in 2004 without cause, and it backfired on him. And he ended up, being the one getting transferred and moved. And then he came after us again, making up lies and fabricating stuff, and we had proof, and it backfired on him again. So I say that to say that he knows exactly he knows exactly who we are, and it doesn't escape me that he's been holding on to this for 15, 16 years, and now he's in the top leadership position, and he can move the chess pieces to enact his revenge. And we see that he does it all the time with people around him. If you don't agree with him, if you go against him, it's off with your head. He's established that tone on the department. He's established an environment of the top leadership that won't say anything, won't go against him in fear of retaliation.
And if you don't mind, what happened with the first incident in 2004? Like, what did you do?
It's kind of a long story, but here's the thing. She wasn't my wife at the time, but we were working at a youth center. And to be quite honest with you, we had a sergeant even before Alex, and this sergeant was a friend of his, and he since has promoted him up into the ranks. But we had a sergeant that came in there kind of like under bad circumstances. He had been moved from another location that he wasn't real happy about. So he came in there with the mindset, look, I'm just going to study for the lieutenant's exam and work out. I'm not doing anything. And so that's what he did. And he did that for close to a year. Cedra, my wife, and I, we were the ones that were doing the vast majority of the work. We had come from a unit where we taught character development, DARE, and SANE programs. So we were really invested in the community. We were really interested in putting together good programs for the kids. And we had a couple other deputies that weren't. Unfortunately, sometimes the youth centers are the place they used to put deputies to get them out of the station. Or if the deputy wasn't cutting it, or if the deputy had been in some trouble. It wasn't the place that you put people that were motivated to work with kids. So we had some deputies there. We came in, when we got to the youth center, there was 2.5 programs. When we left, we had implemented 12. Well, guess what? That made the other deputies have to work too. So long story short, I also was somebody that came from Compton. That wasn't welcome back then. There was a lot of kind of animosity from the deputies because we didn't have to go to their academy. We were grandfathered in. And so I really think it was misplaced anger. But now fast forward that to the supervisors. The supervisor that was there before him, he was a sergeant at the time, Myron Johnson, came in. He wasn't doing his job. It backfired on him, and it actually, once again, it was Cedra, my wife, who basically reported, he's not doing his job. I'm doing it for him. So he got angry. So he ended up getting moved. We had a meeting. The captain came in, And in all honesty, everybody recognized who was doing the work at the youth center. We had one of the most prolific youth centers in the county. We were getting awards for what we were doing. And I reignited the PAL program, Police Activities League, and got us back on track with California PAL and National PAL. I received grants for equipment and character development and trips for kids. So everybody kind of saw what we were doing. Myron got moved. In comes Alex. From day one, he came in and you could tell he was on a, I'm going to get you two, you two are the problem and you're my friend. And he, a couple of months into it, I'm going to try to keep it short because it's really kind of a long story. He wrote a long, like 3 or 4 or 5 page memo. And the entire memo was focused on Cedra and I. About all these things we weren't doing, these places we weren't going, about all the problems that we were creating. And he wrote the memo and he submitted it to the captain. Well, the captain and the operations lieutenant sent him an email and he says, hey, your memo concerns us. There are 5 people working and you focused on these 2, right? But what we're hearing is they're the ones doing all the work. And what you're complaining about, what did you do as a sergeant to address it? So he writes another email, and you're probably going to ask me how I know all this. He writes another email responding to them, and in his response, he literally invalidates everything he says. I verified they were at the meeting that they said they were going to. I checked, and they did do this, and I did this. And so that once again backfired on him. So let's fast forward a couple of months. I was a national PAL director, and so there were conferences, and the director had to attend conferences with the kids. So this was we transported 4 kids to Orlando, Florida. Got on a red eye on Wednesday night. Everything was set up, had the grant, had the funding. We arrive in Orlando, Florida on a Thursday morning and go check in, and they tell us, we don't have any room for you. We don't have any reservation for you or anything. And I'm like, what are you talking about? So I go to the National PAL conference room and I go check in, and I see the coordinator. He says, Eric, what are you doing here? I said, what do you mean, what are you doing? We've been planning for this for months. He said, no, I got a call like 2 days ago saying you weren't coming. And I said, you got a call from who? And he starts telling me that it was Alex Villanueva. So needless to say, I'm in Florida with 4 kids, we don't have any place to stay, and on a red eye, so I'm a little tired. And so I call him. I'm like, what the heck is going on? And he just nonchalantly was like, yeah, I don't know what you're talking about. I get my command staff involved. They fix it. This was on a Thursday. When we returned on Sunday, he had been transferred out. That's what we call kind of an overnight, midnight transfer, because he violated their instructions. He went against their rules. And he was transferred out overnight and didn't have any more dealings with them. Literally, he was transferred to another station. So now you could kind of see, oh, wow, I'm mad. I'm angry. And about a year after that, he wrote a memo alleging that we used force and did not report it. And this was while he was at the youth center. So now he's transferred out. He's no longer there. And then we get called in saying, hey, we're going to have an open investigation. You used force and didn't report it. Right. Here's the interesting thing. Guess who the sergeant was that rolled up when we did report the force? Myron Johnson. After he left the youth center and gone back to the station site, we did report it. We went and got the emails. We went and got the documentation showing we reported this. Alex Villanueva's name on it, and it's got a read receipt. So he ended up getting in trouble again. Just because of his vindictiveness, he just keeps going. So I know him, and I had hoped that maybe he had matured and kind of gotten beyond that, but. In 15, 16 years. Yeah, this was 2004 or 5, and he took office in 2018. But he's pretty much just the same person.
Now, the interesting thing about your platform is you also include a platform dealing with transparency. And one question I want to know is, how much has transparency of the sheriff's department suffered under Villanueva? Has it ever really been good, even before him?
I think there were times when it may have been a little bit better, and you got to, in between Baca and Tanaka, we have McDonald. And I think McDonald was trying to go down that road, and it was being working a little bit more with oversight. With Alex, I think it's gone backwards. I think it's even worse than it was. At least under Baca's regime, we had OIR, Office of Independent Review, with Mike Janocko and his team, and there was communication there. With our current sheriff, there's no communication with oversight, and he fights against every ounce of oversight. We actually have a MOU with oversight that tells them exactly what they can have access to. And I was the unit commander of our Audit and Accountability Bureau and the unit commander of our Advocacy Bureau. So I know these MOUs and I understand what they're supposed to be, and I understand the purpose of oversight. But I think we've gone backwards, and oversight is that path to transparency. If you won't let the monitors come in that have been tasked with that position and that job, how can you really be claiming that you're showing transparency? And then we see it once again, time and time again, and it keeps backfiring on them. We just saw it, with an incident here recently in the news, with a deputy incident where he was kneeling on an inmate's head and neck. There was no transparency there. He is not working to make things transparent. I think he's working once again in his own vein for his own personal, influences or gain.
And just for anybody who might be out of the loop in regards to that situation, there was a report, I guess, of an inmate, or at least a person in custody, where there was an altercation that took place between deputies and this detainee, and they got him down to the ground and handcuffed him, and he placed their knee on his head for about 3 minutes or so. And ultimately, I think this during the period in where, I guess, Derek Chauvin was on trial, I believe. And it was believed that it was a bad look for that information to come out during that time. And so they sat on it. And this was but I guess, same time period as the wise whistleblowing situation with the money and the food situation, right? Why is it now? How did it come out to us now, actually? Because it seemed like it was reported at the beginning of this month.
Yeah, so and I've pretty much, Terrell, have a lot of the same information you have, but I have the benefit of knowing the inner workings of the department and how things should go. So this incident did happen last year, and apparently, like you mentioned, because of the optics, decisions were made that were not in line with our normal process of putting together a case, a criminal case, and forwarding it to the district attorney's office and forwarding it to the investigative units and so forth. So to me, this is a very clear cut, and I have no doubt. Alex is saying he didn't know about it. I don't believe that one bit. But what's interesting, what people will miss, that if you don't know, is this. Even if he did not know about it within a couple of days, as some of his executives have stated he did, even if he didn't know about it then, he's admitting that he knew about it in November and started an investigation and relieved the deputy of duty. Okay, so if you started it in November, then in November, it's safe to believe that you knew that from the day the incident happened, which I think in July or something, to November, steps hadn't been taken properly. But you don't take any action against your executives until the news comes out with it. So in other words, if they did something wrong in November, you let them sit here until March or April with no action taken. And you weren't going to take any action until the news came out with it. And the other most interesting part of this is that now he is wanting to open a criminal investigation to find out who released the video claiming that they stole investigative material. Now, if that doesn't dictate a retaliation, if that doesn't dictate a lack of transparency, because what you're saying is that if you go against anything that makes me look bad, or if you do anything that makes me look bad, I'm gonna intimidate you and threaten you with a criminal investigation against whoever the personnel is that released it. So that in no way is transparency. That is no way in taking the proper steps to do it. That is a absolute let me cover myself and throw everybody else under the bus to save myself. There's no other way to do it. And that's why I say Baca 2.0. That's what Baca did. He threw everybody else under the bus. No, it wasn't me. It wasn't me. And then at the end, okay, yeah, I'll admit it was me, but give me a deal. Right. And so everything that he claims to be fixing and changing and different of, he's really just emulating.
Mm-hmm. Another major plank of your platform is providing mental health professionals to work alongside deputies who are called to handle a mental health break of an individual out there in the streets. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I think we need mental health services. I think we need social services, healthcare services. We have been trying to arrest our way, and I say we, I mean nationwide law enforcement has been trying to arrest our way out of our mental health crisis, our addiction crises, and our homelessness crises. And we're not going to find the sustainable solutions to any of those in a jail cell. So we have to eventually start looking at it and saying, hey, what's the root cause? You're in jail for a crime, but are you in jail because of the crime or because of the mental health crises that you were in that caused that crime? So I think we really need to start looking at what's going to be sustainable and benefit society. And whether it's mental health professionals working alongside, which we do. I mean, we have teams that are out there that do that, but they are in no way enough to cover a county as large as LA County. I would love to be able to get it to the point where we hand it over to mental health professionals completely, and unless there's some type of threat to public safety or actual criminal activity, we shouldn't even be there. I mean, law enforcement shouldn't be the point man, or the point person, or the point woman on handling these things. But the reality of it is that when people are having a problem and it's in the middle of the night and it's 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and their family member is in crisis, who are you going to call at that time? You're going to dial 911. And who's going to answer? And who's the first responders that are going to get there? And so I remember times where we've called on mental health evaluation teams, or we've called on mental health workers, and let's just say I'm in Compton or South LA somewhere, and we don't have the staffing, and they're in Palmdale, and they're still handling the call that they're on. They have to finish that, and then they have to drive. Well, when somebody's in a mental health crisis, you can't say, hey, put that on hold, time out for 2 or 3 hours until the professionals get here. It doesn't work that way. So what we need is a system in place where the professionals can have a reasonable response time and give the services that are needed, and I fully support that.
Now, the interesting thing about that, though, is that as it is, the Sheriff's Department also oversees facilities that house people with mental health, and I think that's in addition to the jails, those who are dealing with mental health issues. Is that correct? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong on that.
They're in our jails.
Right.
Yeah. So our jail houses mentally ill people suffering from mental health issues. And so whereas we have the largest jail system in the country, we technically also have the largest mental health hospital.
That don't necessarily mean that they're getting treatment for whatever their mental health issues are. Is that correct?
I will say this, that we have a mental health department within the county and they're getting treatment, but here's the key. Is that treatment sustainable? In other words, if you're in jail for 6 months and you got 6 months worth of treatment, when you walk out the door, what are you walking into? Are you walking out the door with medication? Are you walking out the door with a referral to go see a mental health specialist? Are you walking out the door with resources? That's where the recycling door comes in, because, if you walk out the door with a limited amount of medication, as soon as you run out of medication, you're going to, start decompensating again. And next thing you know, we're going to be kind of in this cycle of where we're going. So we need real mental health. And I'll ask you this. Most people know where Men's Central Jail is. Right. Most people know where Twin Towers is. Right. Can you tell me where the nearest mental health hospital is for somebody that's in a crisis? No. So, but yet and still, this is a crisis that we're in. And we're talking about the amount of people that are suffering from mental illness. But yet and still, the average person couldn't tell you where to take somebody. If there was somebody right there on the street when we walked out the door, that's, where could you take them? How could you get them help? But we can all tell you where the jail is. Right. So, there needs to be some shift there. And like I said, from, the crack cocaine epidemic, we've been dealing with addiction and trying to arrest our way out of it. And it's not solving our problems. So, we can either keep doing the same thing and keep having the same results, or we can start looking at other avenues and other options and saying, hey, how can we make a change so that we have sustainable solutions? And that's what I'm about. And doing that doesn't necessarily mean you have to be soft on crime. You know what I mean? So it actually frees up law enforcement to go and handle the criminal activities that are going on out there.
Tell me what you know about the trauma prevention initiative. I'm hearing a lot of folks really trying to gin up the effort to sort of deal with the trauma that comes from violent crime, that comes from violence, whether it's perpetrated by the police, whether it's perpetrated by other individuals in the community against each other, in order to deal with the impact that it has on whole families and children. Is there anything in your platform that sort of addresses that? And is there anything the Sheriff Department in the past or currently is doing in that regard?
I'm not real familiar. I'm not real familiar with the trauma prevention initiative, but I am familiar with the concept that you're talking about. And yes, violent crime has a significant impact. It doesn't stop when the crime is over, and it doesn't stop when your loved one comes out of the hospital, and obviously it never stops when after the services for the funeral. I have family members that have been victims of violent crime and have been murdered, and it's something that the family continues to go through, for generations. So I am a fan of some trauma prevention initiatives and giving people resources. What I have heard is about victims of violent crime. There are resources out there where they can get help. They can get they can get help with financial and resources and therapy, and that is something that I think the Sheriff's Department should participate in. We should make sure that those people have those resources and that information. And then it's also trauma prevention in the ways of the activities that we enact upon people. And let's just give this example. There's a family member, or there's a person that is using his grandmother's address, and the person's out there, committing some illegal activity, doing some nefarious things. And guess what? When they're writing on the ticket, where do you live? They're putting grandma's address down, right? So when the police go looking for him, where are they going to go? They're going to go to grandmother's house, and we don't do a very good job of kind of maybe talking to grandma first. What we do is we go and we yank the door off and we kick it in and we go and we toss everything up. And so we just kind of criminalize grandma, and we can't criminalize parents and grandparents for the decisions that their kids are making, but we do. And I understand the process. I understand that, if that's what he's using as his address, that's where you start your investigation. But we have to do a better job at making those people whole when we leave, and not walking away saying, well, what this person is doing is your fault. And that's pretty much what we're saying to them.
Right. Yeah. I was there at the Kennedy's Forum at the Warner Grand.
Okay.
And I was impressed by what you have to say, but I was also taken aback a bit about how often you went after your rival for the sheriff's position, particularly Cecil Rhambo.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just thinking about what characteristics and what qualities that you have that you think will make you a better sheriff than, say, Cecil, for example, Mr. Rhambo.
And if you feel like I went after him often, I'll apologize for that. But I get passionate about, where I am and what needs to happen here. And, the qualities that I have is, your past performance is an indicator of your future performance. And I think what really bothers me is for any candidate, not just Cecil, but for any candidate to speak to things and I don't want to say kind of trick people, but lead people to believe something that I know is not true. You got to remember, I was in the Sheriff's Department. I'm in the Sheriff's Department. I worked under Cecil Rhambo. I worked with Eli Vera. I know what messaging was put forth while they were there. And for me, just say what you are, and I hate to say it like this, but if you're a certain person and you do a certain thing, speak to that or don't speak to it. but don't try to sell people that are not going to do their homework on the truth. And here's the reality. What makes me different is I've never given my allegiance or alliance to any regime. In the sheriff's department, to reach the executive ranks, it's just a tap on the shoulder. There's no legitimate, grievable process that you can test into. It's cronyism at its finest. So, Cecil reached very high ranks. He was the number 3 in a department of 10,000. He was very well connected to Baca and Tanaka. And I don't like the fact that he's trying to distance himself and say, hey, I'm the one that reported this. No, you didn't. I was in the department. Not once did you go to any of those people that ended up going to prison and say, don't do what you're being told to do because it's wrong. Not once did you come out and publicly, and you can Google it, find a public document where he spoke out against it. And when you go and testify in federal court, I think the question needs to be asked, were you compelled? Did you receive immunity? What was your testimony for? Because, and like I said, in that thing, the timeline is this. The Anthony Brown incident started in 2011. I was in Men's Central Jail. Let's skip through the next 3 years. 2014 was the next election, right? McDonald. Tanaka ran in that election. If he was so corrupt and he was such the thing, go look at the records. Cecil donated to his campaign, right? Tanaka and Baca did not go to trial until 2016. So remember this. Cecil left in 2014. He was retired. He had a whole nother job. Jim McDonald was in office. You want credit for testifying against somebody, but you testified at a time when they couldn't do anything to you. They couldn't promote you anymore, and they couldn't do anything. They couldn't do anything for you, and they couldn't do anything to you, right? So, but what did you do while you were there? What did you do while it was happening? What did you do when people were losing their careers and about to go to prison? That's what honestly bothers me. So for me, the difference is I'm not going to try to trick people into saying that I'm somebody that I'm not. I think that the biggest point is this. He's had a great career. He's got all the titles. But we got to ask ourselves, how did you get those titles? And when you get the title because it's a tap on the shoulder and you leave it as assistant sheriff, well, guess what? That gives you the people want to look at you and say, okay, well, come be an assistant city manager. Come be a chief of police over here because you got the title. I'm not saying that he didn't learn anything during that time. But for me, the difference is that I've always stayed true to who I am. I haven't promoted to the executive ranks because I haven't pledged my allegiance. Eli Vera, same thing. He was very closely connected to Baca and Tanaka. He just wasn't old enough and didn't have enough time on to retire. So during the entire McDonald regime, he was put in a corner. He was already a captain. So as soon as he saw his opportunity, he jumped on Villanueva's coattail. And he rode it. He rode it for 3 years until it didn't work for him anymore. Eli was waiting to get promoted to assistant sheriff, and it didn't happen in April. And in May, he announced that he was running against him because the sheriff was vindictive. But you rode that coattail. That's what bothers me about these other candidates. And that's pretty much, I think the difference for me is I'm going to stay true to who I am. I'm always who I've been. The things that I say, you'll be able to hold me accountable to later, and you'll be able to go do your homework. I'm the only candidate that didn't change from Republican to Democrat. And whether you're a Republican or Democrat doesn't matter. But what it is why did you change? You changed because you know where the voter strength is. And now you're trying to tell everybody that you have all these democratic principles. But 2 weeks before you announced, you weren't a Democrat, but you're going after all the Democratic clubs. My background in terms of my personnel file, I'll give it to you. I'll give you my personnel report. And I've challenged the other candidates to do the same thing. I don't have anything to hide. So these are some of the things that I think, when we talk about real transparency, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about not only transparency in my performance as the sheriff, but transparency in myself as well.
Do you think that labeling yourself as a progressive at all can be a hindrance for you? And here's why I say this. You have a DA who ran on that and was put into office as a progressive, particularly on his stances on how he would deal with First Amendment issues and dealing with protesters and so forth, and dealing with specific issues as regards to law enforcement and jailing arrested folks. All those along the line. And he ruffled feathers. And now you have people trying to stage recall elections. And he's not the only one. Even a DA in San Francisco, same thing. Could that be problematic for you, particularly in a period where people perceived that their neighborhoods are a little bit more dangerous than they were before?
Mm-hmm.
And so as a result, they're frightened and feel insecure because of it. Do you think living yourself as a progressive in this moment, at this time, can be a hindrance to you?
You know, I don't think I ever really came out and labeled myself as a progressive, but I think that my ideas and the thoughts behind them in terms of caring for people are very progressive. And so here's the one thing I need to say. For those people that do not want to listen to the entire platform, for those people that are not willing to deal with issues as opposed to labels, then yeah, then they could see that. For example, you know, people feel like, well, you know, if you support vaccines, then you must be this. And that means across the board, you believe everything else that everybody else believes in. You know, if you want to put alternatives to incarceration in place, well, then that means you got to be soft on crime. No, it doesn't. What it means is what we're doing is not working. If we keep doing what we've always done, we're always going to have what we always have had. And you know, again, back in the early 90s, crime was out of control. Homelessness is getting worse, right? Mental health issues are getting worse. They're not getting better, and all we've been doing is trying to arrest our way out of it. That does not mean, when I say alternatives to incarceration, I in no way, shape, or form am talking about, okay, let's go get the murderers and the serial killers and the serial rapists and the child molesters and release them. So no, if people are willing to listen and sit down and talk about it, I think we can have a good conversation and they'll see exactly what I'm talking about. You know, as a progressive, many of them are want to abolish law enforcement. You know, I don't want to do that. You know, that's not my goal whatsoever. I wish we didn't have to have the conversations about law enforcement's lack of trust and lack of communication. But what I do realize and what I do want to take ownership of is that we've put ourselves in this situation, law enforcement. We've created this. And the last thing I'll say is, one thing I don't believe in is blanket policies or blanket laws. Our homelessness, our unhoused population, some deal with mental health issues, some are unhoused. Some are dealing with addiction. Some are families with kids and everything falling on hard times. And some people choose to be out there. So we can't put a blanket, there's no one blanket, one size fits all that's going to solve that problem. And I think some of the policies, and I don't know all of the DA Gascon's policies, but I think some of his policies are a blanket which doesn't work for everybody. Right. So that's one of the things you will not get from me. You will not get blanket policies because we have to realize that in every faction of what we're doing, there's a different set of variables that get people there, and we have to address them independent of each other. So, you know, I hope that people really listen and understand that caring about people and trying to give them services that are going to help them be better, caring about people and saying, look, you're in jail. When you come out, we want you to come out better than when you went in, doesn't necessarily mean that I don't want a safe society. Doesn't necessarily mean that I just want to let, you know, people that are out there, you know, robbing and stealing and killing just go free.
So what is your position on, like, they say, for example, the effectiveness of Prop 47?
Mm-hmm.
I think that was the one in where, well, there are two different laws, I think. One in where a lot of state prisoners ended up reverting to the county jail system that they were from. But two, some crimes were made into misdemeanors with the understanding that they would get whatever help they might need in terms of addressing addiction issues or mental health issues or whatever that may be. Has it been effective? Has anything been done to sort of fill in the gaps of where the law may have been short on filling it in?
So Prop 47 did make some crimes misdemeanors. Specifically, the big one that you hear about is raising the dollar amount of what was misdemeanor theft to now what was originally misdemeanor to felony. So they raised it from, I think, 400, 450 to 950, right? So listen, now everybody's screaming about, oh my gosh, people can steal up to $900, $1,000, and it's just a misdemeanor. If you look at nationwide, $950 is kind of the middle ground. Some states have that limit as high as $2,500, some as low as $300. California raised it in 2014 or something like that. And I mean, it had a lot to do with inflation, but it didn't matter, because in the early 90s, when the limit was 400, I would be at Kmart arresting people for petty theft, misdemeanor, for $399 worth of stuff. We would take them to jail, they'd get cited out, or they'd get cited out right there, and sometimes in the very same shift, I'm arresting the same person at the same Kmart. Okay? So it's not the dollar amount, right? Everybody wants to blame it on the dollar amount. There were a lot of crimes, and I understand the process behind it, where certain things were felonies. Crack cocaine was a felony. What communities did crack cocaine impact the most? But if you had powder cocaine, well, you need help. But if you got crack cocaine, well, you got to go to jail for 15 to 20 years. Something wrong with that. There's something wrong with that. And if people don't want to admit it, I'm sorry, but my opinion is there's something wrong with that. So we changed some of the laws and we tried to implement diversion programs, but I don't think those diversion programs and those services have really been able to be implemented countywide, statewide, whatever we want to say, because we have so many people fighting against it. And I go back to this. Where's the closest, nearest mental health hospital? Where's the closest, nearest addiction services that you can get right now? Nobody knows that. You know why? Because it's all being serviced in our jails. So that's where I'm saying, you know, the Prop 47, it's easy to blame Prop 47, but, you know, what are people doing to actually make some of these laws and some of these crises that we're in? What are we doing to come up with sustainable solutions? So that's kind of my take on Prop 47. Look, it's not for me to agree with. It's for me to lead law enforcement into the realm of stop blaming Prop 47 and just go do your part in the system. That's what we need to do. Don't stop arresting people that commit crimes because your mentality is, oh, well, nothing's going to happen. You know, they're going to let them go anyway. In the early 90s, I would arrest somebody selling drugs, a gang member with a gun in their neighborhood. 2 days later, the same person would be there with another gun. We didn't have Prop 47 and we didn't have Gascon back in the 90s. So it's easy to blame somebody else when what we need is a sheriff that is just going to say, we have to do our part in this process. And then once we do our part, we can then have a sit down with some of the other players in this process, in this criminal justice system, like Gascon, and say, look, we're doing our part. How can we work together? Right now, our current sheriff will never be able to get in a sit-down conversation with George Gascon and try to work together. Doesn't mean absolute concurrence, but in this process, nobody's by themselves. You know, you're not the lone sheriff here. You're fighting with the board of supervisors. You're fighting with oversight. You're fighting with the Gascon. Heck, you're fighting with the fire department. At what point do we look and say, well, what's the common denominator? If you're fighting with everybody, who's the common denominator here? What's the real problem?
All right, Mr. Strong, thank you for coming by. And my defiance, we'll be talking all day.
I could keep going all day too. Like I said, I get passionate about this, but I appreciate the time.